Today we are making the vegetarian main course for the vegetarian course. This is for your second menu. Instead of the chicken and brown sauce, we will be making a veg substitute. Today we are making a grilled cottage cheese steak with parsley coriander sauce. So for the cottage cheese steak, what we will do is we will take some cottage cheese, we will marinate it in salt, crushed peppercorn, Worcester sauce, mustard paste, oil and a bit of sugar. We will marinate it and keep it for, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes so that the flavor of the Worcester, mustard, everything goes inside the cottage cheese. We'll put it on the refined flour, we'll dust it with refined flour and then we'll put it on a pan and we'll shallow fry the cottage cheese. The accompaniment for this, the classic accompaniment for this will be your parsley coriander sauce. Parsley coriander sauce will be made with parsley, coriander. Over here the amount of coriander will be more than the amount of parsley that is used. The flavorings used in this sauce is your garlic, shallots, lime juice, lime zest and olive oil. So all these things will go inside a mixer and then it will be ground to a smooth paste and then it will be finished off with a bit of olive oil and it gives a good flavor. This is a very simple dish to make, but the basic thing to remember over here is that the flavor is very important. Okay, very minimal ingredients, but at the same time you need to make sure that the flavor components are put in the right proportion so that they do not spoil the beauty of this dish. Yes, very important thing over here is the marinade for the cottage cheese. If you do not marinate it properly, then the whole dish goes for a toss. Okay, so now let's move on to the preparation of this dish. The first thing that we need to do over here is we need to marinate the cottage cheese, that is your paneer. So what we'll do is, instead of having uneven pieces, we'll square up the cottage cheese, that is the paneer, and we'll cut it up into small steak size shape. So a steak size shape is nothing but a rectangular piece which needs to be at least of 1 inch thickness. So over here, as you can see, it looks nice and uniform, and we need to make sure that all the pieces of steaks that we are making out of the cottage cheese is of the similar size, because we will be cooking them most probably together and we need to ensure that we do not have a thin piece and a thick piece, because if we do that, then the cooking becomes a bit of a problem wherein there is a possibility that one of the steak might get burnt and one will remain undercooked. So that is why we need to ensure that the shape and the size are the same. We need to trim out, if we need to trim out the edges, we can do so and make sure that all the pieces are of the same size and shape. Moving on to the marination of the cottage cheese, we'll add in salt, crushed black peppercorns, a little bit of mustard, Worcester sauce, oil and sugar. Every ingredient has its role to play. So the salt provides the seasoning to the dish, the crushed black peppercorns gives the texture and the flavor to the dish, the Worcester sauce and the mustard adds to the flavor, the sugar cuts down the acidity which is present because of the Worcester and the mustard, and the oil helps in mixing the marinade together and making sure that the whole marinade gets stuck to the cottage cheese. So over here as well, because we are going to cook the cottage cheese post marination, we can use our hands to mix up the marinade. Ensure that the sugar is properly mixed up with this and make sure that all the ingredients in the marinade are properly mixed up. If we do not mix it up, there is a possibility that one piece of the cottage cheese might get the marinade and the other might not get the marinade. So once the marinade is ready, cover the whole of the cottage cheese with the marinade and keep it aside in the refrigerator for at least 15 to 20 minutes. The reason why we keep cottage cheese inside the refrigerator is because it is a milk product. If it stays outside and there is a lot of heat, there is a possibility that the cottage cheese might turn bad. So to avoid this situation, we will make sure that we are putting the marinated cottage cheese inside the fridge for at least 15 to 20 minutes. The more you marinate the cottage cheese, the more flavor you will get it from the end product. Now to making the parsley coriander sauce, what we will do is we will clean up and wash the coriander and we will use the whole coriander, the stems and the leaves included. This will give the flavor to the whole dish. The stems have a lot of flavor in them, and as we are going to grind it anyways, it is alright to use the stems of the coriander. Then we will take the parsley. Over here always remember that the parsley tends to become a bit more bitter So that is why the parsley will not be used a lot. The proportion of coriander to parsley will be 2:1. And over here we cannot use the stem of the parsley because they tend to be very bitter in flavor. So we'll just roughly chop up the parsley and then we'll add it to the coriander. Over here the flavoring for this dish comes from three things. One is your shallots. So again over here we will roughly chop up the shallots. We are chopping up the ingredients so as to ensure that it is properly ground inside the mixer. Because if you keep the ingredients whole, there is a possibility that some of the shallots might not get ground up properly. The next flavoring that we have for this dish is your garlic. The garlic as well needs to be roughly chopped up, or you can even crush the garlic with your knife or your hands and then add it to the dish. Ensure that you have sufficient ingredients and proper ingredients, because the proportion of the ingredients has to be proper, because if not, then the whole flavor of the sauce go haywire, and sauce is a very integral part of this dish. To this we will be adding a bit of salt, a bit of sugar to regulate the flavor, and then we will be adding olive oil and grinding it in the mixer. So for this we are also going to remove the zest of the lime which will be used. It gives a very good flavor, and at the same time it also adds a different texture to the sauce. So using the zester will remove the zest of the lime, as you can see over here, and make sure that the white part of the lime is not used, because the white part or the pith of the lime has a very bitter taste. So we will not use that, we will just use the zest of the lime, that is the outer yellow part of the lime. Once the zest is removed, you will cut the lime into half and remove the lime juice and keep it for the sauce. Also, if the zests are a bit big in size, you will chop it up properly so that it becomes uniform, and the texture that you get from the zest is a good one, rather than having big pieces in your mouth while consuming the sauce. Chopping up of the zest is to ensure that they are distributed evenly in the whole sauce, rather than one side having the zest and the other not having them. So put the zest onto a plate, and with the rest of the lime that you have on the table, you will cut it up and remove the lime juice and keep it ready for the sauce. Make sure you discard the seeds before you remove the lime juice, because if the seeds fall into the sauce, there is always a possibility that it might come in the mouth of the guest while the guest is consuming the sauce, and the seeds give out a very bitter taste. So you do not want that to happen, and it might also be a choking hazard. So that's why you ensure that the seeds are removed, and then you keep the lime juice ready for when the sauce comes after grinding. You will add in the lime juice and the lime zest. Now in the sauce we will add in a bit of lime juice and the lime zest. Once you've added it in, you will mix it all up together properly and ensure that the lime juice and the lime zest are distributed around the sauce. Make sure that the sauce is properly mixed and ensure that the flavor of the sauce is really good. If you want, you can add in salt at this point. And the sauce needs to be kept inside the refrigerator till the time of service, because the sauce contains green leafy vegetables. There is a possibility these vegetables might turn black if kept outside. Now we are moving on to the making of the cottage cheese steak. You will take the cottage cheese and you will put it onto a plate with flour, and then you will coat the whole of the cottage cheese with the flour, ensuring that one hand remains dry all the time and is used to coat the cottage cheese with flour, and the other hand is wet, which will be used to transfer the cottage cheese from the marinade plate to the plate with the flour. Before you put it onto the flour, make sure that you take sufficient marinade with the cottage cheese, you mix it up and then you put it onto the flour. Over here also you need to ensure, after coating it with flour, that the flour is not excess. You need to remove the excess flour by just tapping it on your hands like this. Then that will ensure that the excess flour is removed. because if there is excess flour, that flour will go onto the tawa or the frying pan in which you are going to fry the cottage cheese stick. You need to take a tempered pan and you need to add an oil to that and get the oil up to proper temperature. The pan needs to have proper oil and needs to be a proper tempered pan, or else the cottage cheese will stick to the pan. You can place the cottage cheese onto the pan once it's heated up, and then you need to keep it on the pan without moving it for at least 1 to 2 minutes to ensure that the coloring of the cottage cheese happens properly. The cottage cheese needs to be brown in color, resembling a steak which is normally made with beef. So you keep it on a medium to a high flame, and then you do not keep moving it around, or you do not keep turning the cottage cheese, because if you keep turning the cottage cheese, there is a possibility that it might overcook and might start crumbling rather than turning brown on one side. So just move it a little bit so that it does not stick to the pan, to ensure it is not stuck to the pan, and just leave it on the pan for at least 30 to 45 seconds. Once you feel that the color of the bottom of the cottage cheese has changed, you just slide in your flat spoon and just check whether the color has changed. Over here, as we can see, the color has changed. We can flip the cottage cheese now. Even the other one can be done the same. Flip the cottage cheese and now let the other side brown. This is a very important step because this decides the texture of the whole dish. Do not keep it on a very high flame, or else it might start burning the cottage cheese, which we do not want. Keep it on a medium to high flame. Again, over here as well, you need to keep it for some time to ensure that the coloring takes place properly, and you need to have a uniformly brown colored cottage cheese on both the sides. You need to ensure that both the sides are brown properly, because the guest will enjoy the texture of the cottage cheese only if it is brown from both the sides. You cannot just brown one side and leave the other side as it is, because that does not give the required texture to the dish. Over here, as you can see, it is browned properly. So we will flip it for one last time to check whether both the sides have browned. On this cottage cheese, it is not browned properly, so I will still keep it for some more seconds. And then once that is done, I will flip the cottage cheese and take it out onto a plate. This is very important step, because you need to be very careful with this cottage cheese. It might tend to break. Before frying the next batch of cottage cheese, you need to remove the debris of the flour and the crushed peppercorns from the tawa or the frying pan, because that might start burning, and then wipe the frying pan with a duster. This ensures that the pan is clean and can be used for the next batch of cottage cheese. So again, we follow the same process. We'll add in a bit of the oil, spread it around properly, and then put in the next batch of cottage cheese. Over here, if you feel that the amount of oil that is added is a bit less, you can add a little bit of more oil. And again, follow the same process of keeping it on the pan undisturbed for a few seconds, that is 35 to 40 seconds. And then you flip it to see whether it's turned brown. Once it's turned brown, you will again keep it on the other side for the same amount of time, and then check whether it is done. And once it is done, you will remove it out onto a plate. And we now move on to the plating of the cottage cheese steak. First, on the base, you add in a bit of the parsley coriander sauce, and then you will place one of the cottage cheese. I cannot use my bare hands to use the cottage cheese, because it is already cooked and it is going out to serve the guest, going out for service to the guest. So I will pick it up with tongs, one of the pieces, and the other pieces I will put it on top to just give it a bit of a height. And then you can pour the sauce from the top to ensure that the cottage cheese is covered, but at the same time it is still visible to the guest, so that the guest can see the brown spots on the cheese steak and can have it. This is just a very rustic style of plating the dish. It can also be plated in very different ways, but then still we are just learning the basics of plating. So it is a rustic way to present the dish. So cottage cheese steak with parsley coriander sauce is ready for service. Thank you.